Well, welcome to the Business Spotlight series. My name is Tanner Bryan. I'm a senior partner here at Action Coach in Central Texas. And I am so excited to be sitting down with Jean Ann Booth here this morning, who is the CEO of Unaliwear. Very exciting stuff going on there. I know, Jean, you've got an amazing story to tell and kind of how you got into business here. So excited to jump into some of this. But for the audience here, if we could, let's just start with just like super high level background. Tell us a little bit about what is Unaliwear. Let's start there, and then we can kind of peel back some of the layers and have some conversation. So, thank you. I'm going to hand it over to you for just a brief intro, if you would.
Sure. So for Unaliwear, focus groups first called our Kanega Watch, a wearable OnStar for people. We're often called the Apple Watch for seniors. So we're the only wrist-worn automatic fall detection in the United States that is connected to medical alarm operators who can directly dispatch emergency services without going through 911. It's really cool stuff.
That is really cool. So, how did you? What brought about getting into this business and starting this one out?
Yeah, so I started Unaliwear with my mom when she turned 80. I'm a serial entrepreneur. This is actually the third company I've started. Sold the other two, one to Apple, one to Texas Instruments. So I started Unaliwear with my mom when she turned 80, and that was almost 10 years ago. Now, mom's gone now, but she was a model. This is her picture behind me on the box right there. That's my mom. She was absolutely not willing to wear a stigmatizing pendant as she got older. She was totally cognitively capable, but she was getting a little bit more physically frail as she aged. And there just weren't any products for people who wish to live independently with dignity, safely. And so mom was our senior user experience advisor. She was personally responsible for about the first 100 people who came through our focus groups. Over 400 people came through. She was personally responsible for about 100 of them. And that was during the design of the Kanega watch. And mom had the final say on every single wearer-facing design decision in the beginning.
Oh, that is really cool. What were some of? I'm just curious. What were some of the things that as she went through kind of that design phase that were like really important that have made it into what the watch looks like today?
So we actually designed the Kanega watch specifically to extend independence with dignity for vulnerable populations. So yes, we're a smartwatch, but we're actually better than a smartwatch because one of the things that came out of working with mom was the understanding that as people age, they lose that chemical signal in the back of the brain that says I'm thirsty, quits working. And so you lack the galvanic skin response that powers touch. So the Kanega watch is not touch, it is speech. You talk to it, it talks to you. And so if you've ever seen a senior, with their finger and they're just wailing away on their iPhone, if they just lick their finger, it would be fine. It's not that they don't know how to use the technology, it's that they don't understand it's because they're dehydrated, it's not responding.
Oh, that's really fascinating. I don't believe I knew that before.
Most people don't. It's just one of those things. It's like, we had another one, which is actually the real reason that I came out of retirement to start the Unaliwear and the Kanega watch is actually our patented quick swap battery system in the band. So you never have to take it off to charge. You get 4 of these little battery pods, 2 on the charger, 2 on the watch, and there's a safety battery inside so that even if the ones that are on the watch get dislodged in a fall, there's still enough power to get a GPS fix and to spend 15 minutes on the phone with the medical alarm operator. And that's out of understanding that in the senior part of our demographic, the number one cause of injury death is falls, and those mostly happen in the bathroom at night. So anything else you don't have on.
Hmm. That is brilliant. I love that. So I'm curious. Taking a step back, uh, how did you mentioned you had 2 other companies before this, sold them. Give us a little bit about your background. How did you get to this point where this third company, working with mom and building things from there? What did your journey look like getting up to this point?
Goodness. So I went to the University of Texas at Austin as an electrical engineer back in the day. Worked in industry in industrial process control and semiconductors for a while. Joined a startup that failed, which was critically important because that's an important thing to learn. Failure is not your death. And then started the first one. So as part of a founding team for a company that sold to Apple, we were best known as the graphics unit in all of the iPads. And then I started another one that sold to Texas Instruments. This one is really nerdy. It's the first of the ARM-based microcontrollers. It's a huge market today. It's about $128 billion. So not that TI has that, but that's the size of that marketplace today. And then funny enough, after those two, I retired. I was a dive master on a liveaboard dive boat based in Key West. And, that was great. And then mom turned 80. So, it was in talking to my friends and some of the folks who'd worked with me in previous companies that we came up with the battery system in the band. And, it was almost a decade ago. So the Apple Watch didn't exist yet. The iWatch was rumored, but it didn't exist. And here I am pitching a watch that is speech, not touch, that is 24/7, right? Goes where you go, cellular, Wi-Fi, GPS, Bluetooth for hearing aids and telemedicine devices. And everybody's like, are you crazy? Maybe, but we did it.
How was the adoption of that back when the wearables as they exist today weren't quite the same, right? The Apple Watch wasn't out yet. What did that adoption look like, and was there resistance there in trying to overcome that market, or what? Tell me a little bit about that look like.
So it was super helpful when the Apple Watch actually came out, because of course they're doing all the marketing that makes wearables something that everybody gets, right? And I appreciate that every one of those dollars they spent. Because over that period of time, my discussions changed from, no, you don't have to have a cell phone to pair it because it is a cell phone, to, okay, here's the difference between an Apple Watch and a Conago watch. And it's significant, especially in our demographic, because we don't go through 911. We actually go direct dispatch through medical alarm call centers. And so that means that, if you have an issue, they know, hey, the emergency responders are going to see Jean Ann. She has diabetes. She's allergic to aspirin. They know exactly who I am and all of my stuff before they get there, which you can't do with 911.
That is fascinating. I guess I kind of forget about those pieces and how critical it is to have that information immediately right on hand. Um, oh, that's really cool. Taking a step back, because you had mentioned a couple things in your journey I want to kind of ask some questions about as well. So you mentioned really important, joined a startup that failed.
Yeah.
What were some of the main lessons that you learned in that kind of being a part of that fell apart, that did not work? What were some of the biggest lessons that you learned that you took and were able to expand upon as you went on to build three additional companies?
I mean, I think, the very first one was, failure is not the end of the universe, right? And you know, I mean, I was only with that company for 9 months, but still, that's an interesting challenge to go through. And at the time, that company had raised about $33 million in venture capital. The board came to me and asked me to sell the engineering team, and they wanted to at least get their money back. They wanted at least that 33 million back. And at the time, we had roughly 33 engineers, and the acqui-hire price for an engineer was about $1 million. So, if you go to, these are semiconductor folks, right? So if you go to a semiconductor company and you say, I can give you a fully functioning team of 33 semiconductor engineers, and all you have to do is pay $1 million an engineer, plus you have to, of course, pay them a bonus to come and work for you because they're not getting that $1 million. The VCs are. That was the first, beyond the failure lesson, that was the first other important piece, was just understanding, truly how venture capital works and the difference between the employees and the funding entities or preferred shareholders.
Hmm, that's really cool. Um, Was there a lot of pushback on that when you were, going through that and experiencing? Were Was it successful? Were you able to find a way to get
No, it
to?
was not. I mean, that was, actually when they told me that, I went back and gave them the same economics I just gave to you and said, you know, why would any semiconductor company do that? I mean, it's so much cheaper if they just wait a month or two. Oh, by the way, we hadn't been paid for I don't know how long before this happened. Never did get that pay, by the way. Um, and so, all they have to do is wait a month or two, and people will take that job without any retention bonuses, without paying $1 million an engineer, right? So yeah, they ended up doing fine. They sold one of the patents for $60 million, so they ended up getting double their money. But still, it was a super important lesson, because if you're going to do venture capital, you kind of got to understand how it works.
Yes, kind of an important piece there to understand that, and I love that you're sharing that. So fast forwarding into kind of the next couple of companies, uh, starting them, what roles did you play, in those companies? Was it, always the CEO role? Was there other roles within it that kind of you gravitated to more? What did that journey look like for you as you grew through those companies?
Actually, the only time I took the CEO role was Unaliwear. So I was often the business ideator, not always, but often. Certainly the primary fundraiser. But this was a long time ago, and yeah. Can I stop there?
Yes, you can. Um, Well, I appreciate that, and it's I always like to ask that question, especially in when you've gone through multiple companies and such, because it's there's multiple hats and roles to play, especially in growing and building things like that. And I think it's important to kind of explore that fact. So I appreciate the answer that you've given. Um, so I always like to know, the journey along entrepreneurship in general. And we've already kind of seen a little bit of it. It's almost never a perfectly, linear line. It's always positive. It's going to be great, and you just grow, grow, grow. I'm curious if there's a couple, and one or two that just kind of are most memorable, that are either challenges, hurdles, kind of roadblocks that you came up against, that helped you grow as an entrepreneur and as a person, that's allowed you to get to the point where you are today.
I'm going to give two. And they're not necessarily hurdles and things. They're more kind of things that I've learned that are super important. Well, okay, so can I do four? Okay, so the first one is, kind of like CSI, I have rules. Rule number one: never run out of money. Right? That was the lesson of that startup that I joined. Never run out of money.
That's a good
Uh,
lesson.
yes. It sounds so easy, and by the way, it's not. Rule number two is never mess with payroll. And so that means you always ensure that payroll is actually running. So like when we would get a corporate acquisition or something, and some group would go, oh, we're intrapreneurs and we know exactly about the entrepreneurial journey. We always have too much to do and not enough people and not enough budget. My answer is always, have you ever paid payroll out of your own pocket? And if they say no, then they're not an entrepreneur. But there's another piece to that too that's a super important lesson. And somebody tried to teach me this lesson, and I told them we were different. And what I learned is we're not. And that is, when you're dealing with a cash flow problem, you cannot take care, you shouldn't take care of it by salary reductions, 20% across the board or 10%, whatever you do, because all you end up doing is losing your best folks when you do that. And it doesn't really even matter how mission focused your business is. When I did it once for Unaliwear, I was like, oh, everybody's so invested in independence with dignity that they'll stay anyway. And that didn't happen. That's just not the way it is.
Hmm. So if we could on that one, what do you believe now is a better course of action? If you were to do it again, look for ways to solve some of the cash flow problems, where would you suggest other entrepreneurs and business owners look first before going to salary reduction?
Well, I mean, there's many, many things you try before you get to a point to where you're saying, suggesting that a salary reduction might be a reasonable thing to do. But my perspective is, if you get to the point to where you've tried all of the other tools and the only thing you have left is a salary reduction, it is much, much better to go ahead and do a headcount reduction than a salary reduction.
I like that. That's a really interesting way to look at it. And I imagine there's a much different perspective of how things are going and how people feel in that situation when you look that direction. So very interesting. Hmm. So if we look at outside of kind of challenges and the journey from that side of things, I always like to ask about the keys to success and kind of setting the stage on this here. You can look at definition of keys to success, but really the way I look at it is when you look back on your journey overall, and for you personally, clearly you've been successful. By my measures of success, you've been a great success, growing and building multiple companies, being where you are today. But when you look back on your journey, what are some of the things that you attribute your success to, either things that you do consistently or people that you make sure that you have in your life, or whatever that is for you? What do you attribute your success to as you look back on your journey?
I think one of the things that is critically important is, of course, to have the right positive focused people that are a part of your life. In my case, my best friend is a fellow electrical engineer from the University of Texas. Her name is Arlene. And I have so many, rule number 4, by the way, is hers, that have come from her. And especially this particular startup was actually a real challenge to get funded. And so, every startup goes through parts and phases where you're trying to figure out, do I keep going? Do I keep going? Do I keep going? Everybody's telling me not to keep going. And she's like, do you still have paths to go down? And I'd say, well, yeah, I can talk to them or do this or talk to them. And she'd go, well, then you're not done. Just keep taking your steps. And because of that, we're still here. So it goes hand in hand with, tenacity, grit, resilience. I mean, I always just called it stubbornness. My mom and I used to joke about who was more stubborn. And shortly before she passed away, she actually told me, she says, you know what, Jeananne, you're more stubborn, because I would have given up on Unaliwear. And of course, here we are today. We are growing great guns. We're 5Xing this year. And that tenacity really matters. And the part of that tenacity is, Arlene saying, you're not done. You still have paths to go down. Just keep taking your steps.
Just keep taking your steps. I love that. It's so true. There's always something that can keep moving you forward and going down that path. That's really cool. Usually I like to ask a question about kind of what's been the most memorable piece of advice that you've ever been given. Outside of that, is there anything else that comes to mind if you think back on just memorable piece of advice? And I always like to phrase it that way because sometimes the most memorable isn't always the best advice that you've ever been given. But outside of the just keep taking your steps, is there anything else that comes to mind when it comes to memorable piece of advice that you've been given along your journey?
So actually, this was something that I learned, and it was especially in this particular company because we joined a startup accelerator out of New York. It's really kind of an academy. You continue, it's not a 3-month thing, called Startup Health. And so we joined them in 2014. I'm still an active member today, so almost a decade later. And so during that time, I had lots of time to watch lots of health related and digital health related startups doing things. And I realized when everybody would get together, like the big conference would be, the startup ecosystem around JP Morgan healthcare conference in San Francisco. And I'd watch everybody getting together. And of course, they're all doing their PR. We're 5Xing this year. We're crushing it. We're, whatever. And of course, then somebody else who is 6 weeks away from running out of money is feeling, really small. And what I realized is you really can't compare your reality to another startup's PR. Because oftentimes the guys who are saying that they're crushing it, we're also 6 weeks away from running out of runway, right? But they're telling that, you know, positive, hopeful message and story of where they want to be instead of hanging out where they actually are. And so if you actually got him to say, oh, God, it's kind of tough. We're 6 weeks away from running out of money. Then at least you guys would be in misery together. But nobody's going to do that. So you can never compare your reality to another startup's PR.
Mm, there is so much power in what you just shared. The number of times where when you can get business owners just to have that conversation of here's where I'm actually at, and then you can actually have conversations about how you move forward instead of just believing that somebody's much further ahead or wherever that might be. Um, and yes, I think too often that PR can jump out a little bit too far in front and forget that when we all have these conversations together, we can actually win together. And there's kind
Yeah.
of some cool things that happen around that. So Gina, when you look at what comes next, what are you excited for as you look, for the future of the company at this point in time? What's coming up next that you're really excited about?
What's coming up next? Well, I mean, we are growing and truly scaling in a way that none of my other companies have ever done before. So that's really, really exciting. And speaking about reality instead of PR, I've discovered that scaling is another word for grow, break, fix it, grow, break, fix it, grow. And everybody's like, oh, we're scaling, as if you have this continuous path of just nonstop growth and it all just goes sunshine and roses and unicorns from there. And that's not real. Grow, break, grow, break, go, break. And I told one of my board members last year, before we got our final funding, which is where we are today, I said, remind me when we get to this state, and I'm dealing with the grow, break, remind me that I said I can't wait to be there, where I'm not doing continuous fundraising, but I'm actually dealing with growing and breaking. And so not long ago, she called me up and she goes, Jeananne, you told me to remind you. Okay, you're right. That's where we are.
Oh, I love that. The number of times that I've had conversations with other entrepreneurs, and the when that realization comes, and having the systems, the things that you put in place for getting to your first million in top line are not the same systems that you need when you're 10 million, 50 million, et cetera. They do break. They don't work when you get to certain levels of volume and team sizes and all that kind of stuff. It's like, okay, now we got to fix it and grow upon that. And there's a lot of truth in the grow, break, fix. So I like your terminology much better.
Well, everybody says scaling as if it's this smooth, just kind of upward path. And it's, it's not.
So I do want to be respectful of time. Before we kind of jump into really kind of my final question, I always like to end on. There's kind of two things I'd love to ask. One of them is getting to know where we can find out more information, where those that are watching that want to learn more, to buy the product, all that kind of stuff. But before we answer that question, we look at Unaliwear, we look at the Kango watch, we look at all of this. What's one thing that you wish our audience, or just the audience in general, knew more about this product or service that you guys offer?
I think the one thing that I wish that people knew a little bit more about, especially if you have loved ones who might be vulnerable, which don't necessarily have to be old. Our youngest wearer is 23. Our oldest is 103 and a half. Is this. Although there are some other wrist-worn devices that have fall detection, they go to the bottom of the 911 queue. Okay. And so what that means is that 911 gets around to it when they get a chance. So if you're in a major metropolitan area like LA, I think is running 4+ hours to the bottom of the queue, just because there's so many false alarms that they had to do that to stop, 911 being overwhelmed by these devices. And that's completely different than what we do with a Kinaga watch. You don't go to the bottom of a queue, even if it is an automatic alarm because maybe you fell and you're unresponsive, you're still not at the bottom of a queue. So it's really important to understand that, and the bit that says that the FDA won't allow us to put an emergency medical device in connection with any physiological sensors. So no heart rate, no blood pressure, no hydration status, none of that stuff. That's the FDA's rules. And that's why the Apple Watch goes to 911. And that's why we don't have heart rate or any of that stuff. It's not an engineering challenge. It's a regulatory challenge. And so if what's important to you is emergency medical response, then a Kinaga watch is the solution that you actually need.
Wow. That is incredible to me. I'm glad that you shared that. That is definitely something that I did not know. And I would venture to guess most people don't know. That is absolutely fascinating. I'm very grateful that you've shared that. So thank you. So for those that do have that are interested in the product themselves, or have loved ones that they care about, that may be interested, how can they find out more information? Where can they go to connect with you, to find out more information on Unaliwear overall? Give us some information on where we can go next.
Sure. We actually sell online. So it's unaliwear.com. Unali is Cherokee for friend. Kinaga is Cherokee for speak. So we're the friends who speak to you. So unaliwear.com. And also the phone number is 888-343-1513. So you can talk to us that way too. And for anybody who's actually watching or listening to the podcast here, if you use the code Action Coach, all one word, you can get a month free service after 6 months, or you can add an extra month at the end of an annual plan. So that's 13 months for the price of 12. That's a $69.95 savings for your loved ones.
Beautiful. I appreciate that. For those that are watching and listening, I will put all of this in the description below. So as soon as we wrap up here, please go down, click on the website, check it all out, take advantage of this amazingly gracious offer, promo code Action Coach. So please do that. Make sure you connect with Jean-Ann. I will put your contact information, the LinkedIn, all that kind of stuff in there. So those that want to follow you and learn more about what you're up to, they'll be able to do that. One of the coolest things that with these conversations is when we can connect other entrepreneurs and business owners here in the area. So please make sure that you take an opportunity to do that. But as we wrap up, I always love to end on one specific question, and that is, Jean-Ann, what is most inspiring to you today?
It should be pretty obvious that I'm human. So when I need inspiration, I actually listen to some of the help calls from our Kinaga watch wearers. I got to say, they're really, really hard to hear, right? Sometimes they make you cry because they're people in trouble. But it's so inspiring to know that solving my mom's problem is now saving lives every day all across the US. And thank you, Mom. That's all because of her.
Amazing. And I'm going to give thanks for all the work that y'all have done and being able to create this and sharing this information with us here today. Really inspires me that there are folks, there are companies out there that are looking at how do we solve this issue that may not be commonplace knowledge for everyone to know that there is a challenge, especially in a day and age where there's a lot of different wearables and things like that, but are not connected in the same way. So thank you for sharing this. Thank you for sharing your story with us today. It's been a genuine pleasure to have you here on the conversation with me today.
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here.